The Ridgeway Mall was once a bustling epicenter of activity, but by the time I started working there, it had long lost its charm. Most of the storefronts were vacant, their display windows plastered with faded for lease signs. It felt like a relic of a bygone era, with only a few stores still clinging to life. I didn't think much about its desolation when I accepted the night guard position. It seemed easy: walk around, check a few cameras, and pocket a decent paycheck. What could go wrong? I arrived for my first shift on a cold November night. The manager, a wiry man named Mr. Calloway, handed me a flashlight, a list of rules, and a tattered map of the mall. Something about the map caught my attention right away. Several sections were marked with red XS, and one area, deep in the West Wing, had been scribbled out entirely. "What's with the red marks?" I asked, attempting to keep the mood light. Mr. Calloway didn't even crack a smile. "Stay out of those areas," he said firmly, "especially the West Wing." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And if you hear anything strange, keep walking. Don't investigate. Just don't." The way he said it gave me chills, but I shrugged it off. I figured it was just a scare tactic to keep rookies like me from messing around. By 2 a.m., the mall was silent, its once vibrant corridors now eerily still. The only sounds were the faint hum of vending machines and the occasional creak of the building settling. The place felt larger at night, its shadows stretching endlessly under the dim emergency lights. As I patrolled the West Wing, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it might be a loose pipe or an animal trapped somewhere, but the sound was too deliberate, like someone knocking on wood. My flashlight beam swept across the hall, landing on a door I hadn't noticed before. It was unmarked, nestled between two abandoned storefronts. Its surface was scuffed and weathered, as though it had been forgotten for decades. I hesitated. That door wasn't on the map. Curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I approached the door. The tapping stopped the moment my hand touched the handle, and an unnatural chill crept over me. The door was unlocked. It groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A faint, flickering light illuminated the steps, though its source wasn't visible. The air was damp and smelled faintly of mildew, mixed with something metallic, like rust or blood. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to shut the door and pretend I'd never seen it. But my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me down the stairs. The steps seemed endless, the walls closing in the deeper I went. Finally, I reached the bottom and found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, each one cluttered with strange objects. Dusty jars filled with murky liquid, faded photographs of people who looked decades, if not centuries, old, and peculiar trinkets that gave off an unsettling aura. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it sat a large, ornate box. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols I didn't recognize, but that felt inherently wrong. Next to it lay a key. Logic told me to leave. This wasn't my business, and the room radiated an oppressive energy that made my skin crawl. But something about the box drew me in, as though it were calling to me. My fingers trembled as I picked up the key and slid it into the lock. The click echoed through the room, louder than it should have been, and the lid creaked open. Inside was a single object, a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with cramped, uneven handwriting. The entries detailed bizarre rituals, unexplained disappearances, and strange phenomena, all tied to the mall. One passage stood out. The room must remain sealed. The key must never be found. To open it is to invite them back. As I processed the words, the temperature in the room plummeted. The faint light flickered and then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. And then I heard it, a shallow, rasping breath. The sound wasn't mine. My flashlight flickered to life, and in its beam, I saw them. Shadows, tall, distorted figures, pressed against the walls, their limbs impossibly long and their movements jerky, like marionettes with broken strings. One of them stepped forward, its featureless face tilting toward me, as if it could see me despite its lack of eyes. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, the journal slipping from my grasp. The shadows began to move, their movements synchronized, almost ritualistic, as they closed in. Desperate to escape, I backed into a corner, clutching at the objects on the shelves. My flashlight illuminated a symbol etched into the floor, a crude circle with intersecting lines. Instinct took over. I stepped into the circle, and the figures froze. Their whispers turned into wails, a sound so piercing it felt like it would split my skull. The walls of the room began to warp, stretching and twisting like they were alive. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The light returned, dim and flickering. The shadows were gone, and the staircase was back. Without a second thought, I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. When I returned to the main hall, the mall felt different. It was still silent, still empty, but the oppressive heaviness had lifted. My heart raced as I made my way to the security office, ready to quit on the spot. But when I entered, something stopped me cold. The monitors were on, and every screen showed the same thing: the unmarked door. Shadows moved just beyond its frame, flickering in and out of view like static. I didn't quit that night. I couldn't. Instead, I took the journal home, hoping to make sense of what I'd experienced. The more I read, the more I realized how deep this went. The mall wasn't just haunted. It was a gateway, a place where something ancient and malevolent lingered, waiting for a way out. And I had opened the door. Since that night, I haven't been able to sleep. I dream of the room, of the figures in the shadows. Sometimes, I wake to find the journal open on my nightstand, always to the same passage: the room must remain sealed. I don't know if I've unleashed something or if it was already too late. But if you ever find yourself in an old, forgotten mall and come across a door that doesn't belong, don't open it. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. And now, I have to wonder, was the room calling to me? Or was I always meant to find it?